Before this video begins, I just want to say that if you find any weird language of me talking about things in past tense and present tense and all that jazz, this is because, for full transparency, this is actually two separate recording sessions that I recorded and just decided to merge into one. I decided myself, instead of wasting yapping about the Game Awards and never use any of the footage, I would just make one big retrospective. And also, if you guys are here for the Expedition 33 AI situation that's going on right now, go to this timestamp. It's basically towards the end of the video. Also, it'll be chaptered down below. Alright, enjoy. It hasn't even been a week since the Game Awards 2025 announced the nominees for its different categories, and there's already drama behind it. I feel like the meme of the guy basically like coming back with the pizza with the whole room on fire and everyone's just like went ape mode and they like went insane. That's literally how I feel right now. Just to paint you guys a picture of how much talk there's going around about the Game Awards, I'll go through a couple of examples in like a lightning round format. You have Mario Kart World not getting nominated for Best Soundtrack because I know the game is controversial in terms of its game quality, but one thing that's pretty unanimous is that the game has really good music all around. So a lot of people were saying that Mario Kart World got completely snubbed in like the one area that it should get. There's a game called Trails of the Sky that didn't get nominated, and people have been comparing it to Outer Worlds 2 that's in its place. That people feel like Trails of the Sky should be in its place instead because Outer Worlds 2 is inferior to Trails of the Sky. You have a dev working on Ninja Gaiden 4 basically coming out saying that he was sad that the game did get nominated for Best Score in Music. You have people complaining that Sonic 3 is not in the Best Adaptation and instead having, you know, the Minecraft movie. Sonic 3 proved that you could do a good video game movie trilogy with no misses and it doesn't make the cut over the meme movie that's probably winning in fucking Demon fucking Adventure fucking featuring fucking Dante from the fucking Devil May Cry series. Guys, I think this person might be a little angry. Then this situation, which I'll go into like a tiny bit more detail of, because I did find the conversation interesting, with this game that came out very recently called Dispatch, which is basically a game made by former Telltale employees. Now, it had only gotten nominated in one category, and that was for the best debut indie game. And there were a lot of people that found that pretty disappointing because of the game's quality, and there were people even saying that it should be a contender for Game of the Year, while others were just happy that it made into anything at all. Dispatch! And what's happening is that it's kind of getting screwed over a lot solely because of the time frame of it getting released, and that affecting it being nominated for both this year and the next year as well because of the weird time the game came out, on top of it being episodic, screwing it over as well for this year since the game wasn't finished. So a lot of the jury didn't feel comfortable nominating it for other things like best indie in general.
One sort of rule that does exist for the previously established sort of rule-less Game Awards is that there's a cutoff date. Dispatch, of course, is episodic. Episodes 1 to 4 were out by November 4th, but that's it. It is actually possible that some people nominated it for other categories. Again, the Game Awards is pretty ruleless, but I would think that majority of the jury was not comfortable nominating it for things like Game of the Year or Best Narrative without being able to actually finish the game.
I would have thought Dispatch would be eligible to be nominated next year, based on that November 4th cutoff date for when people had to submit their nominations. But now that I've seen that the website says November 21st as the cutoff date, we actually discover that Dispatch is kind of in a position where it cannot be nominated for either year. Technically, this is the first time I know of this happening. Dispatch couldn't get nominated for anything this year because naturally people are not comfortable nominating a game they haven't finished for Game of the Year, but it's also not eligible as specified by the website for next year because the game has to have been out by November 21st.
So if it does turn out to get screwed in that way, that really sucks because I'm one of those people that really like the game a lot and think that it was a pretty standout title for this year. I also think it could have gotten other nominees for things like Best Art Direction instead of games like, for example, like Ghosts of Yote. Because of the game having a consistent art style, you'd be able to tell by the episodes that come out that it is pretty cool, and I like the Invincible style that it kind of went for. But at the end of the day, I am happy that if anything, it at least got some recognition. And as a recent update to this specific situation, the Game Awards had contacted Ad Hoc of this exact issue, and they said that they do in fact qualify for 2026. So that's good at least. So as you can tell, there's tons of talk all around, and there's for sure more that I'm missing, but I wanted to go into super detail about the biggest controversies. And let's start with probably one of the more controversial ones, Arc Raiders. Now, if you guys don't know what Arc Raiders is, it is a multiplayer extraction adventure set in a lethal future Earth, ravaged by a mysterious mechanized threat known as Arc. So Arc Raiders is basically an extraction shooter, similar to games like Rainbow Six Siege or Marathon, that officially came out October 30th. So kind of before we talk about how it and the Game Awards are related, we do have to rewind the time a bit to talk about this one fully, because out of all the things I'm going to talk about today, this is the one that's got like Batman levels of backstory to it. This started earlier on specifically November 10th when reviews had first come out for the game. And the game was littered in controversy all around. The reason why we'll get into, but specifically the one that was highlighted the most was a review by Eurogamer. And you can even see it in its title that says Arc Raiders review, a smartly designed extraction shooter marred by one inexcusable decision. Gross in the machine. Now obviously I'm not going to go through the entire interview, but in this review, the person reviewing it gave it 2 out of 5 stars, which is very, very low. That's below average. And the reason for the low score was because of the generative AI that it has for voice acting. And people were talking about how much does that affect the game's quality, because other than that, the review labeled the game as pretty solid in pretty much every other facet. It was strictly the generative AI that made it lose 3 stars in total, which is a lot. I'm not gonna hold you. Now, I've said my opinions about this kind of thing in a video I made about AI not too long ago. Specifically, I was talking about the Darth Vader controversy. That, once again, if you want to hear more in-depth stuff about it, you can go onto that video and watch it. But basically, my take is that as long as the parties are consenting to it and they let them know about it ahead of time, they don't sneak them, and they perform the AI exactly how they say they are, I don't really have that much of an issue with them using the AI in the game. Though if you have a personal gripe with it, that's completely alright as well. Just don't play the game. I'm just saying I don't have much of an issue with them using the generative AI. And this caused a lot of people to voice opinions on if the review was too harsh or not. Basically, the two sides, to sum it up, is that the defenders say that the game's quality shouldn't be that lowered because they decided to use AI in the game, and that there were real voice actors involved in the project. They just approved of the AI being in the game. It's not fully AI, and that, once again, it shouldn't lower the score that much. Then, on the other hand, you have other people who are completely anti-AI, saying that the person reviewing the game has the right to have that opinion on the game if that ruins their experience to that extent. And then once again, you'll have the anti-AI people who won't even touch a game if it has any sort of AI in it. I should probably say generative AI because all games have AI in it. Just generative AI is the problem. And to be fair to the people against the review, apparently they ranked Concord out of all games to be higher than Arc Raiders. So like, I think putting the generative AI aside, it's not that bad. Like, come on now. Now, one of the people that defended the game's quality and really liked it was Shroud, who, if you guys don't know anything about him, he is a former esports player that had played games professionally, those games being Valorant and CSGO. These games being 2 multiplayer shooter games. So when Arc Raiders had come out, he was all in, basically licking the Arc Raider schlong. He was completely in love with the game, and he praised it a lot when he first played it, and was on the side saying that it's one of the better shooters to come out this year.
Like, this game is the most casual shooter ever. It's a very, very forgiving game. Once you get the blueprints and like once you get enough of like, you get a decent foundation of like some materials, and then that could supply you for a very, very long time. Like, I could die like 50 times and still have stuff.
And from there, he's been playing the game quite a lot. When you check his channel, he's uploaded a shitload of videos on the game, and he's kind of been just the main spokesperson that's been singing the game's praises. He's like the poster boy at this point. You may as well just like slap him on the front of the promotional art. Now, he had liked the game so much that he said even before the Game Awards announced its nominees that Arc Raiders should win Game of the Year, and he also encouraged people to go out there and vote for it if there was the opportunity.
Dude, we got to make sure that this game wins Game of the Year, by the way. Do not let that Expedition game win Game of the Year. Do not let it. We all have to band together to make this game win. We are the minority being multiplayer gamers, but I believe we can win.
Now, when he had initially said that, he also did this thing that I really don't like people doing, which is bringing down another game to prop his game up, in which case he did to Expedition 33. Which, hold on, before anyone says anything, I'm gonna talk about it, alright? Stop frothing at the mouth, take your horse tranquilizer, and shut up! Now, because he had said this and compared it to Expedition 33, you had other big streamers like Asmongold that criticized him and gave him pushback, saying that Expedition 33 does deserve to be on the Game of the Year category, and Arc Raiders doesn't. Now, in general, the Game Awards hasn't historically not really had multiplayer shooter games being present in the lineup that much, especially for being Game of the Year. That's the case outside one category that seemingly is dedicated to those type of games, which is Best Multiplayer, and Arc Raiders is even nominated for it. But when we talk about nomination for Game of the Year, or I guess other categories, but really we're talking about Game of the Year, the only time a multiplayer shooter won was Overwatch back in 2016. As for other shooters that were nominated for Game of the Year, the ones that I found was PUBG, that was nominated in 2017, and then technically you could say Deathloop, which was nominated in 2021, but other than that, shooters hasn't really been Game of the Year. However, just to be clear, the reason why shooters hasn't been Game of the Year is because a lot of them either really bad or kind of just don't deserve it necessarily, only because it's the same thing, which takes the formula of Overwatch and just like changes it a tiny bit, which makes those games overshadowed by other single player games that have a lot more notoriety to it than these other multiplayer shooters that come out. Now, because of this, when the nominees inevitably got announced and Arc Raiders wasn't up there on Game of the Year, bro got very salty, and then he said that the world isn't ready for AI in video games and called it rigged.
Here, Expedition 33 from Sandfall Interactive. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach from Kojima Productions.
Bias.
Donkey Kong Bonanza.
Bias
from
paid off, Nintendo.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 from Warhorse Studios.
The world's just not ready
There
for...
you have it, your nominees for
The world is just not ready for AI in video games. Not yet. They're just not ready. I genuinely thought they wouldn't nominate it for anything because they were scared to get backlash. But at least they nominated it for something.
Now, I'm sure this was said... Now, I'm sure this was said in a way to kind of like clip farm for attention, but I do think he generally feels like Arc Raiders did get screwed out of Game of the Year because of the whole AI controversy. He even said that after he finished announcing the games, that he thought that it wouldn't be in there at all because of it using generative AI. And he wasn't the only one that felt this way, because XQC, who's another one of the biggest streamers, had this exact take. However, while Shroud kind of gave the Game Awards a lot of credit for having it at least nominated one time for something, XQC kind of went further with it, saying that basically the Game Awards were trying to avoid alienating their viewer base who play Arc Raiders and think it deserves to be on the lineup, but in actuality they're alienating those who care about the integrity of the show. That's his words. Also, he said, why is Speed not nominated?
Yeah, skibbity toilet. 6-7. Symptoms are heard.
That's a very good question. Personally, kind of conflicted on this. Maybe this is the case because it wouldn't be the first time they did something like this. Probably the best example off top is what they did with Hogwarts Legacy, where I personally think they completely kept it out of the Game Awards because of that dumbass controversy that happened with it. But I will say, if they did feel like it was that controversial, they would have just done what they did with Hogwarts Legacy that year and just not include the game at all. But on the other hand, how I feel is that I would agree maybe it should have gotten like best sound design. Usually the sound design for most shooters is really good. That's usually a highlight standard of most shooters of any type of variety, whether it be extraction or single player or whatever the case. And it is weird that out of all the games that got nominated for it, Battlefield 6 is like the only shooter that was on the list. Now, I personally have never played Arc Raiders, but I did find this comment interesting of someone talking about how Arc Raiders is very different from other shooters. So they say, what trips me up is that Arc Raiders isn't nominated in Best Audio or Best Action Game. And they say for Best Audio, you find Battlefield 6, which gun sounds and stuff is vastly outclassed by audio from various games that came out 6 years ago. And Arc Raiders is one of the rare games which I can confidently rely on for audio cues like explosion and gun reverb to localize where it came from at longer ranges. And then when they say for Best Action Game is that Battlefield 6 is also in the second one, but the campaign is barely holding itself together. It's serviceable at best, and the multiplayer is, while very fun, doesn't feel much different from the last 2 decades of FPS titles, whereas Arc's gameplay has truly been amazing between the fight/friend moment with other players. You actually have to think about what you're going to do in a raid. It's not the usual fast-paced run, shoot, snipe, blow up, die, repeat offered by Battlefield and Call of Duty. So I think it's something interesting to think about. While I don't think that Arc Raiders deserves Game of the Year, I will say it did get snubbed out of categories like Best Audio. I think that should have been a given, especially when you look at the nominees. Shroud's comment about it being rigged, especially when you take into consideration that he had this take last year too with Black Myth Wukong not being Game of the Year. It's funny for two reasons. One, it just comes across as him complaining that the game he liked isn't nominated. So he kind of just looks like a crying baby, not gonna lie. But then on top of that, when people say that the Game of the Year is rigged, it's like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. It's pretty open secret that the Game Awards barely count towards the players' vote when it comes to the Game of the Year. I mean, they even have it on their website, and you see how our winners selected. It says that it's a blended vote between the voting jury, which counts for 90% of the vote, and then you have public fan voting, which is 10%. At the end of the day, and once again, this has been something that we've known for years, our voices don't matter when it comes to a lot of these categories. That's even why there's player's choice in the first place. However, when the Game Awards happened and they debuted the one nomination that Arc Raiders was in, that being Best Multiplayer, it turned out that they ultimately did win. So props to them for that. Getting off that, there were a couple other situations where kind of the opposite thing is happening, where games are being argued whether they deserve to be in a specific category, with the main one being Expedition 33, which I know we're going to talk about. Real quick, I want to talk about a game called Megabonk. Now, Megabonk was a game that came out back in September, and as of right now, it's probably one of the most beloved indie titles to have come out this year. Now, how I kind of look at it is that it's basically a 3D version of this game, Vampire Survivors, which both are these kind of roguelike type games that has you grab a bunch of loot and power-ups, and you basically travel in different levels, and the goal is that a bunch of enemies horde to attack you, and you just have to survive for as long as you can. The game was overall really fun and was received very positively by people, as you can see from the very positive reviews that it has on Steam. So naturally, the game would get acknowledged in some aspect and get nominated for the Game Awards, which it did. Specifically, it got nominated for the Best Debut Indie Game. Now, no one really had a problem with this at all. Once again, the game was good, so there was really no complaining from people. One of the few times where people didn't complain about a category. And in fact, the only person that really had a problem with it was the dev that made the game, in which he proceeded to make a statement that they were actually going to withdraw from this specific category. Jeff Keighley, who's the main host of the Game Awards, he had made a statement as well, confirming that this was indeed the case and saying that they respect him for doing this so he doesn't take away from any of the other teams that debuted this year. And I have to admit, it is a super Giga Chad move to remove yourself from the nominees, and he ended up getting a lot of respect from people, admiring his humbleness, and there was even different studios that were giving him credit as well. And honestly, if I wasn't such a broke bitch and had no money, I would have bought the game then and there. I'll buy it eventually, just snarl now, please. Struggling to eat a morsel of food as it is. Another thing that happened in the pre-show that I thought was really funny was Okami completely owning the libs. I love it. I loved it a lot. So as you guys know, last year, Okami was the big announcement for the Game Awards of 2024. To my understanding, a lot of people were actually disappointed by that announcement. However, those people are all like Call of Duty dick lickers, and they don't understand and they don't play anything else except freaking Call of Duty and NBA 2K. Which is really funny because someone said, I still loathe Jeff Keighley for this stuff last year. And in response, Okami said, is this more to your liking? And put a picture of Amaterasu next to a gun and a basketball. That is the most amazing corporate own of all time. That's hilarious. Is this more to your liking? Whoever runs the Capcom account, give that nigga a raise. And that brings us to one of the most talked about games right now in terms of the Game Awards, Expedition 33, which is this RPG that came out to nothing but complete glaze from every side of the pond. It got amazing receptions across the board. Now already off the top, you had a lot of comments of people saying that the game is going to completely sweep and it's going to be a pretty bland year for the Game Awards overall.
So what games got nominated for Game of the Year? Well, there's Claire Obscure Expedition 33. We all knew that was going to make the list, but who else did? It doesn't matter. What? Yeah, at this point, everyone's just really going for second place. But what about Silksong and Hades 2? As much as I love those games and they are nominated, they're not going to be beating Expedition 33. Well, could one of those win Best Indie Game? See, they could, but Claire Obscure is also nominated for Best Indie Game. What? Yeah, and Best Indie Debut, which sadly means Megabonk is also not going to win.
Now, why people felt this way is because usually a good indicator on what games could win at the Game Awards is you look at, other events that are formatted similarly to the Game Awards that happen, and look at what happened there. People's primary example here being the 2025 Golden Joysticks, where Expedition 33 won 7 awards, including Game of the Year. So because of that, its sweeping like that is at least some subtle foreshadowing on how the Game of the Year category is going to be for the Game Awards and how that's going to look, which is it winning every single category it gets nominated for. And that's not all either, because it got 12 different nominations, which is the most that a game has ever received in the Game Awards, even beating out the incredibly rigged 11 nominations, you know, the game that keeps getting released like 5 years later. Now, usually people don't have that much of an issue when a game sweeps categories, when it does in fact deserve it. Like, for example, how Baldur's Gate 3 went back in 2023, with it even winning Game of the Year, and there are even people that consider the game Game of the Year worthy, and without hesitation has voted it for Game of the Year.
Starting with Game of the Year as the first category, huh? Bold. But I've said since the second the credits rolled, Expedition 33 was probably going to be my Game of the Year. The thing that came closest to it was Silksong, but still Expedition 33.
But this is as long as the categories that the game wins make sense. And this is where the controversy mainly lies. Now, the specific categories that a lot of people had an issue with the game being in is Best Indie Game and also the Best Independent Game. And the reason why is it's not really either of those things, especially independent. I would say it's definitely more trad wife, if anything. Coming from someone who actually does some indie game development on the side, I know for sure it is not an indie game. It certainly is masquerading itself as one. And for some reason on release date, there was a rumor, debunked by Sandfall Interactive devs, by the way, that only 30 people worked on it. Furthermore, upon inspection, the team had actually outsourced battle animations, voice work, music, and cinematography. Post-game credits also reveal at least 224 people working on it, and probably many other names are omitted from the outsourced work. Also, this game had huge amounts of funding because the director is actually the son of a wealthy French trust fund owner, Richard Broche, who also bankrolled the game together with a bunch of wealth undisclosed investors. In fact, within the first year of development, Guillemot's bank account showed he owed $2.7 million to an unknown entity. That's why they can afford Hollywood voice actors. And then they call it a high-tier AA game, bordering on a AAA game with the amount of funding. So basically, people's argument is that since the game has all of these technicalities to it, and that a lot of the game is outsourced and have hundreds of people working on the game, which in a normal case, I don't have any issues with, and nor do I care that much in terms of the game's actual quality, and I'm sure other people feel this way as well. Not everything has to be with a small team, but in the context of the Game Awards, specifically it being nominated for games where it's independent or the best indie title, people feel like it's unfair to the other games that got nominated in those specific categories, and I can honestly see people's argument there. I feel like for it being best independent game, I think the comment kind of says everything it needed to say. However, as for it being an indie game and it being nominated in that category, that mostly depends on what your definition of what an indie game is.
What is indie anymore? It used to mean a game that didn't have a publisher. Blueprints, which is my personal game of the year, by the way. Like, Jesus Christ, I love that game. It was published by Raw Fury. It took an incredibly small team, largely one person, Tonda Ross, I think 10 years to make, but because at some point Raw Fury either paid Tonda so he can finish making the game, or it just gave him help actually releasing it into the world, it is not technically indie by old terms. Absalom was published by Dotemu, Ball Pit was by Devolver, Expedition 33 was published by Kepler Interactive. Hades 2 and Hollow Knight Silksong are the only games in the independent category that are actually independent, in that they were self-published by the developers and are really weird examples to use because they were also able to self-fund by virtue of their insane profits from previous games. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 is an indie game. Think about that. Baldur's Gate 3, which is estimated to have cost over $100 million, does not have a publisher. Larian is not owned by a publisher. The team at Larian was over 400 people with, when you include outsourced partners and contractors, which we should, become over 2,000. But it's an indie game.
I feel like if you have hundreds of people that are basically rising the tide of the game, and especially if you have someone, if the comment is true, to have that much support backing it, basically on the level of a AAA game, I have to ask myself, is it really an indie game and should it be in this category? And from what I see with Expedition 33, I personally probably wouldn't consider it for being in that category, especially when you put that compared to games that have way smaller teams. games. Like Blueprints, for example, that has about 24 main core people working on the game, alongside people like testers and all that. Like, you get the point. And once again, I'm not fully married to the idea that it shouldn't be considered for best indie game. Once again, it just depends on what your personal definition of what an indie game is. However, I will say that I think it being nominated for best independent game is crazy, because it's very clearly not independent when you look into it. Now, I even saw people talk about how it doesn't even deserve to be game of the year, which also ties back into the Shroud and Arc Raider situation from before, because he also had another tweet implying that it's rigged in favor of Expedition 33, and specifically highlights that game instead of Arc Raiders, which he thinks should get nominated instead. Now, once again, it depends on what stipulations depend on a game being game of the year. If we're talking about genre defining games, and that should be the standard for what game of the year means, by that logic, and like all biases aside, would I say that Arc Raiders, for example, is a defining game for this year? No, probably not. Another that went on was teased a while back, having to do with that like desert statue that was shown. Now, to give more context, it started with this tweet of Jeff Keighley tweeting out a part of the statue saying regal.inspiring.thickness. And then the Game Awards then responded by saying 3 sentences that were partly bleeped out, saying the blank are silent, blank bleeds, new blank stir. And initially when people saw this, they took that to mean that this could possibly be a reference to Bloodborne, possibly getting a sequel because of the mention of bleeding. You have here, the howls are silent, the hunter bleeds, new nightmares stir, and then that equaling Bloodborne. And then that led into a bunch of other headcanon theories that people got into, because obviously this is teasing a huge announcement that was coming to the Game Awards. So I said, we also had theories about why it had to be for Diablo 4 DLC, or a new From Software title, or a new God of War. I did see a lot of God of War guesses on there, and it turned out to be this game made by Larian Studios, which you guys don't know is the ones that made Baldur's Gate 3, which was one of the biggest games that came out in 2023. It also had like somewhat swept the Game Awards, not as much as Expedition 33, but it got a lot of awards. I remember that. And the desert statue was connected to them in the sense that it was in the announcement of their brand new project, where they had quite literally an old man burn alive on stage. Which, what was funny is that a couple days before the Game Awards, it had actually previously been leaked due to trademarks that got registered, where people saw the trademark for the Divinity logo, they saw a trademark for like some guy getting strung up, and the little logo thing that was on the desert statue. And then if you look at a picture of the desert statue, you can see the symbol of the old guy behind the logo, and obviously the logo itself matching the logo that was registered in the trademark. So that's how people were able to figure out it was Divinity. Regardless of, the trailer did look really impressive. It's just that there's no like gameplay or anything, so it's not really anything to get hyped about right now, but it does look good, I will say that much. And there was also people hoping for Half-Life 3. The amount of copium I saw in the chat while I was watching the Game Awards was hilarious. Apparently, from what I'm reading here, it says it has to do with the Steam Machine, which is the new console that Steam's entering into the console marketplace for. They announced the Steam Machine, which is set to launch in 2026, and they thought that Valve would basically announce Half-Life 3 as kind of a flagship title to have the release of the console start out strong, which would be an insane start to a console launch if that was to happen. Obviously, nothing got announced, and the Half-Life fans, I'm not gonna lie, they are not doing so hot. They're like cursing Jeff Keighley's entire bloodline. It's really bad. But now, gamers, let's transition to the Game Awards itself and the situations that went on after it finished up, featuring Mr. Jeff Keighley breaking up live with Kojima on stage, which, let's just say, definitely caused some friction.
You did it again, James. You pushed away the one guy who actually gave a damn about you.
Me and a couple of my friends, we actually sat down and reacted to the Game Awards for a little bit, and I'll probably have clips of that just playing throughout the video. There's a lot of interesting moments, a lot of events to talk about. Now, once again, there's 2 gigantic, girthy elephants in the room that we need to talk about. However, I wanted to talk about some smaller things as well, actually. There was a bunch of different dramas that happened, a bunch of different micro dramas, and obviously because this involves so many different communities, you're gonna have kind of community bashing. There was a couple different announcements that I would personally say I was excited for. I'll kind of just give you guys the list. There was the Tomb Raider games. I really like the Tomb Raider series. A couple of years ago, actually, I actually did an entire playthrough of the game that you cannot see anymore. and you should never see anymore. So if you guys see here, there's actually like an entire leak that happened on December 11th before the Game Awards actually started. So basically it was this, right? So this was a leak that had Tomb Raider Catalyst set in the wake of a mythical cataclysm that has unleashed ancient secrets and awakened mysterious guardian forces. And then you had Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis, which seemed to be a remake of the very first Tomb Raider. You know, the one where she had like the triangle titties and the jumping around on dinosaurs.
Watch me go!
And it turned out that those leaks were completely true. They leaked both games at the same time, and honestly they looked really good. I'm really excited for Tomb Raider Catalyst, though that's coming out 2027, and the remake of Tomb Raider is actually coming out in 2026 next year. I assume it's going to be like late 2026 because they didn't give a specific release date, but 2026 regardless. That's pretty solid, I would have to say. Another game that kind of caught my eye, it was this stop motion game called Out of Words. So yeah, I assume it's like this co-op game, and it's like stop motion, and it looks really cool. It actually kind of reminds me of Little Nightmares a little bit, so I'm actually really interested in that one. It looks really nice. Another one that I really liked was Phantom Blade Zero. I thought that game looked pretty sick. I like the gameplay. It reminded me of kind of like Black Myth Wukong. Now I wanted to acknowledge another game on my list, but for a different reason other than the fact that it caught my interest because I like the game, and that is the 3D platformer game they showed early on called Bradley the Badger. And the reason that it stuck out in my mind, and keep in mind this is not me saying the game is bad or anything, but I just think this is really funny. It just reminded me of that Unreal Engine Mario game that you see everywhere anytime there's someone talking about how much they like love graphics or something. Nintendo hire me at game be like, holy Reddit joke, man. I am so unfunny. Jesus Christ. But speaking of Nintendo, though, there wasn't a lot of like Nintendo games there, which I think was really funny. At the awards, they announced this game called Orbitals for the Nintendo Switch 2, and that game looked pretty sick. Hopefully it's under $60. We'll see. It's Nintendo. You never know. Coven of the Chicken Foot, which when I initially saw it, it reminded me of The Last Guardian, though my dumbass couldn't remember the name of the damn thing.
No? Whoa. What is this? Hold on, it looks familiar actually.
I think this is a new thing.
No, the design looks something familiar though.
Oh, he plays like an old lady? Oh, it's like that Guardian game. Wait, hold on. What? Yeah, The Last Guardian, yeah. There was a lot of issues people had with the Game Awards this year, but one of the biggest issues was the final announcement for the game. Jeff Keighley, as Jeff Keighley does, hyped this game up. He said that the game is not going to be one of those games where it gets announced and it then comes out in 4063. However, we heard nothing about it. It's a brand new release. Then he said that the game was being created by former developers of Apex Legends and Titanfall. The big one to focus here is on Titanfall, which is a really beloved game. I haven't played Titanfall because I'm not a fan of like multiplayer shooters, but people really loved the campaign of Titanfall 2. So when he announced that, it actually got people really hyped because maybe it's like a spiritual successor to Titanfall 3. However, in the moment, I was thinking to myself, maybe it's like a really cool single player shooter thing that has kind of the fluidity of gameplay that Apex Legends has and maybe borrows from that game, but then has the story of Titanfall or something along those lines. Basically, I was just huffing copium because it turned out that the game was Highguard. And all you need to know about Highguard is that it is basically another hero shooter. And the other thing you have to know about it is that it is not being received well. In fact, when IGN uploaded the official trailer to the game, it got 8.8 dislikes, and the like to dislike ratio is pretty bad. It's really bad. And then you can see here they said they were doomed the moment they started the trailer with from the creators of Titanfall and Apex Legends, and they showed us this and not Titanfall 3. And it would also be another thing if they didn't have this as the final announcement. When you have an event like this, you want your final announcement to be super good. I mean, two of the most important aspects of a show is your beginning and your end. Those are kind of the two most memorable points, especially the end. So you really want to nail it, and they just did not nail it like whatsoever. And yeah, the game is being trounced right now. It's not doing good, and honestly, for what it's worth, I completely understand why. You have the classic Jeff Keighley hype to hero shooter slop, and I usually hate that word. I hate the word slop. People are actually comparing it to Concord, and it's Concord levels of bad. I don't think it's that bad because once again, we don't know the gameplay. Maybe it's like super hype, but the trailer for it did not do it justice if it is like this incredible game that's coming out. I'm kind of, once again, indifferent because I haven't played Titanfall, so I don't really know, but from what I understand, it's actually a really good game. And yeah, I would definitely agree that I think having Highguard as the last trailer doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They should have just had that in the middle. I would have said either having the Tomb Raider announcement at the end or having the new Star Wars Fate of the Old Republic. That was one of the biggest games that got announced. That would have been way better as a final announcement. However, I have problems with that game too because there was actually a recent report out by Jason Schreier, and I'm gonna find it. And it says Star Wars Fate of the Old Republic may not release until at least 2030. So here you can see, once again, this is Jason Schreier, and it says last night's biggest surprise was Star Wars Fate of the Old Republic, led by Casey Hudson. But Lucasfilm says the studio was founded this year, which means that 2030 is an optimistic guess. Dog, why? Why announce it now? And just for a quick update on this, a few days after I recorded this part, the director of the game had come out and actually fully shut down the rumor, saying that while the game was in quote-unquote early development, he said for people not to worry about the rumors of it coming out in 2030 and said that it'll be out before, and then said the reason for that is because he's not getting any younger. So with all that being said, you guys will not see me crashing out and we'll move swiftly along. Now, the other biggest thing that a lot of people had issues with was Expedition 33 literally taking everything. Like, they're fucking Phantom Thieves and Persona 5, bro.
And the Game Award goes to Claire Obscure, Expedition 33.
Okay.
And the Game Award goes to Claire Obscure, Expedition 33.
Laureat Testa.
Wow, I am shocked. I am shocked that Expedition 33 won again. Oh my goodness. Yo, guys, what do you think's gonna win here, guys? What do you think's gonna win here? Take a wild guess.
Dude, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's anyone's game.
Kingdom Hearts.
Monster Hunter. Probably Monster Hunter.
No, what the f?
My
how?
No, how did they win again?
Holy shit, I'm shocked.
Of course.
I'm shocked.
Oh my god.
Oh
my god.
And the Game Award goes to Expedition 33.
Oh my god, I'm shocked. What the f? Yo, I'm so happy every time we come up, we just hear this singing opera every time. I love it. I love the Expedition 33 awards. Woo!
So the tradition goes, this year we're lucky to have that game's director present Game of the Year this year.
I wonder who's gonna win.
Oh, it's gonna be Expedition 33.
No, it won't be.
And the Game of the Year is...
Alright, shut up.
Hold up.
Expedition 33.
Oh my god, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Let's go.
What's them? Oh man.
Oh my god, bro. At this point, who needs to go to the awards?
It's the Expedition 33 awards, bro.
Boy,
out here.
They won almost every category.
Charlie Kirk did die.
Rigged,
yes, he did. He died for Expedition 33. RPG Claire Obscure Expedition 33 dominated the awards. It went into the night with a record-setting 13 nominations and ultimately took home 8 out of a possible 10, including Game of the Year. So it won damn near every category it was in, which was insane. This was a crazier run than, once again, The Last of Us back in 2020 when they won damn near every single award. And it kind of introduces a problem that I didn't even think about until I saw comments talking about it. So this one says, no game deserves to win 11 awards. Just imagine if one movie won half of all the Oscars. I don't care how good Expedition 33 is, it could be the best game to ever exist, but it shouldn't win 11 fucking awards. And then this was in response to a tweet that said, this is a great year for gaming with a wide variety of incredible titles, and you would never know it for watching this fuck-ass show. And I think it does introduce this problem where games that came out in 2025, where 2025 was a very good year for gaming. However, you wouldn't really know that by watching the Game Awards because all that was really there was like Expedition 33. Half the categories, they went ahead and scooped up an award from everyone else. I feel like in the future, regardless of how good a game is, like whether it's that or whether GTA 6, whenever that game comes out, you already know that game's gonna be Game of the Year. I feel like it shouldn't be in all the dominated categories like that. Just to be clear, I don't want to take this away from the devs at Expedition 33. It does deserve Game of the Year in my opinion. game. I like the story behind Expedition 33. I think it's really inspiring, but the problem arises when we're talking about the Game Awards because it got nominated for so many categories. I feel like in the future, there should 1000% be a limit on how many nominations the game can have at the Game Awards, because it just doesn't give any of the other games that, in my opinion, I think deserve some spotlight as well. So for example, considering it is an RPG, I think it winning Best RPG makes sense. I think it winning Best Narrative makes sense. I would even say it deserves Best Game Direction, and I think Jennifer English put her foot in the voice acting, so I think that's perfectly fine. But Best Art Direction, when you have games like Hades 2 and Hollow Knight Silksong that, in my opinion, I think do a much better job at that, why is it nominated in that category? Let's be honest, realistically, Expedition 33 is just in that typical hyper-realistic style, which is not bad. But, like, come on now. Also, Best Indie Game, I really do think there is other options that you could have chosen that isn't Expedition 33. All the spotlight on Expedition 33 very recently has all pretty much been, like, overwhelmingly negative. And I feel like that's so unfortunate because Expedition 33 is a solid game. It's really good. But a lot of people are just going to hate it because it's popular. This happens all the time with people where they just hate something because it's popular. Even I'm guilty of that. I'm not going to hold you. I think Charlie said it best because I watched his video where he said basically less is more, where other games can get spotlight and they still win like 4 or 5 awards or whatever, but then other games have a chance to shine as well, which will have people less hate Expedition 33 when it gets Game of the Year and stuff, because at that point it won't have swallowed all of the Game Awards into one, you know?
When I'm finished, you can have what's left.
But you know what, guys? All of that slurping of Expedition 33, the one thing Expedition 33 cannot beat is the 30-year-old crack addicts that play gacha games.
Wow. This year, the fans selected Wuthering Waves as the winner.
Base.
Congratulations.
All right, so we're going to get a free 5-pull or what?
And this taking over that it did involved itself in a controversy regarding everyone's favorite topic, AI, alongside another critically acclaimed game that got the same criticism, Baldur's Gate 3. So this controversy starts shortly after the Game Awards, where figureheads of the games that got announced and nominated will go on and do interviews talking about the respective games that got spotlight. Now, this included Larian Studios that announced Divinity as their next project. One of the interviews that the leader, Swen Vic, ended up doing was one with Bloomberg, in which they talked about the future of Larian as a studio and where they're going with Divinity, giving some behind the scenes of its production. Now, the most important section that we're going to get into is when Swen talked about their usage of AI, and I'm going to read it off exactly how he says it. So it says, under Vic, Larian has been pushing hard on generative AI, although the CEO says that the technology hasn't led to big gains in efficiency. He says there won't be any AI generated content in Divinity. Everything is human actors. We're writing everything ourselves. But the creators often use AI tools to explore ideas, flesh out PowerPoint presentations, develop concept art, and write placeholder text. The use of generative AI has led to some pushback at Larian, but I think at this point everyone at the company is more or less okay with the way we're using it, Vink said. Now this is him talking about how him and the employees at Larian utilize AI into their workflow. And this would also be the case for Divinity. So if you haven't noticed with games like Arc Raiders, AI is a touchy subject for a lot of reasons. So them hearing that a company is using AI, specifically generative AI, basically has them flash back to that Garfield show scene where the dude is talking about not needing animators and that everything is done with computers. The technology is taking away jobs and not only replacing people, so people do have a right People do have a right to be wary of it and ultimately make sure that companies aren't using it to replace people. However, this in turn caused people to shit down Larian's throat, basically denouncing them for using AI in any way. So this is an article that highlights a lot of sentiment about how people were thinking of this quote, where some people say, I was so excited for this game, but if you're willing to undercut concept artists and can't even think about the foundations of your game without using a slot machine to make it so you don't actually have to think or be creative, I'm not paying you a single cent. Using AI in concept/rough stage is even more concerning because that's where the creativity is supposed to happen. And trust me, there were tons of more examples of people basically saying essentially the same thing. So now hearing the entire context of what he said in the interview, because that was the extent of what Swen Vic talked about with AI on that interview, I think we can all agree that this is not what Swen said at all. And in fact, he said the exact opposite in that same interview. So these are the two paragraphs we read about him talking about generative AI. 2 paragraphs up, it says, one thing that they're not doing is getting smaller. One tactic for reducing the development time is to develop many of Divinity's quests and storylines in parallel rather than in linear fashion. That's requiring significantly bigger and better writing and scripting teams than Larian ever had before. And I don't know about you guys, but considering that the game seems to be similar to Baldur's Gate 3, story and narrative are 2 very important aspects of the game. I would say probably one of the most creative aspects because you have to create so many pathways and endings, thus why they rely on the writers so much. So I would personally argue that that's the creative point of the game, not necessarily doing things like making a PowerPoint presentation. But at the same time, Vink said, the creative process itself is actually something you cannot accelerate. Giving writers, designers, and artists time to iterate and explore ideas is what led to the success of Baldur's Gate 3. This is him recognizing that human touch into a project is what makes the success of the game in the first place. And he specifically highlights the creative process. Once again, this goes against comments that was talking about AI was being used to accelerate the creative process, which once again is not true if you look at the article. And then they say people underestimate how many times we're implementing something and realize that in the middle that is just not going to work. I'm not going to give my full opinion on this just yet, but I will say that I don't know about y'all, but this does not sound like a horrible boss that's trying to replace people or artists at all. And on top of that, he's made it no secret and super clear in past interviews that he and the devs use AI for monotonous tasks that no one wants to do. Basically, this is a giant nothing burger. But people were still livid and were saying that Baldur's Gate 3 is terrible and they're not going to support Divinity whatsoever because of this apparent revelation that they've not made secret. This got the attention of Swen Vink, who had responded to the whole thing via a statement on his Twitter account, basically saying that they're not pushing hard or replacing concept artists. Then he says, we have a team of 72 artists, of which 23 are concept artists, and we are hiring more. The art they create is original, and I'm very proud of what they do. Asked specifically about concept art and our use of Gen AI, I answered that we use it to explore things. I did not say we use it to develop concept art. The artists do that, and they are indeed world-class artists. We use AI tools to explore references, just like how we use Google and art books. At the very early ideation stages, we use it as a rough outline for composition, which we replace with original concept art. There is no comparison. We've hired creators for their talent, not their ability to do what a machine suggests, but they can experiment with these tools to make their lives easier. But this statement was not received well, with people saying that this was still fostering an environment to make it okay to have AI replace people, and that using it in any way is bad. Please keep this in mind for later on. And then he provided another statement a couple days later that I'm not going to get fully into for the sake of time, but basically he's reassuring people that the process was just something that they were testing out at the time, saying it would be irresponsible for them not to evaluate new technologies, and that they would do an Ask Me Anything featuring their different departments, so that way people will get an opportunity to ask any questions about them and their dev process while making Divinity. This ultimately got the attention of Gene Park, who followed the controversy with a tweet that put Expedition 33 in their crossfire, with the team admitting to using generative AI as well. So now let's go through that so we can provide some context to that. So to start, let's go over an article created by El Pai on July 19th, 2025, which in turn just seems to be a piece talking about Expedition 33, as this game was super popular back then. The article itself seems to talk about ways that companies use technology to cut production time. And just to be clear, in that aspect, it doesn't just talk about AI, but also things like Blender and Krita that are free programs that anyone can use to close the gap with the biggest companies in the industry. And they basically used Expedition 33 as the biggest example that proves that at the time that the article came out. Now, they did ended up getting a hold with the producer at Sandfall, and they ended up talking about how they used AI in their process very vaguely. And this is what Gene Park highlights in his tweet. It says, optimizing resources. We use some AI, but not much. The key is that we were very clear about what we wanted to do and what to invest in. And of course, technology has allowed us to do things that were unthinkable a short time ago. Unreal Engine 5's tools and assets have been very important in improving the graphics, gameplay, and cinematics. When he mentions assets, he's referring to pre-built 3D elements like a house or tree or a path that can can be used to build scenes, significantly reducing production costs. And part of the reason that this was probably brought up was due to a very minor drama that happened when the game first came out, where a user on Twitter brought to Sandfall's attention that there was generative AI that was present in the game, and showed a picture of some newspapers on a pillar that very obviously shows, by looking at obvious tells of AI like deformed words, that this was in fact generative AI that was being used here. At first this was looked at with disappointment, and rightfully so. However, a few days later, in one of the first patches of the game, they ended up resolving this, with the user reporting back saying that the generative AI on the pillars were only placeholders and were replaced with the assets that were supposed to be there in the first place, and referenced another AI poster in the starting area of the game that was also fixed as well. Now, going back to that same interview we covered, they do indirectly address people's concerns that they had, because people were suspicious of how much was used in the game, and something that El Pais added later when the article came out, because there was a couple misunderstandings. Sandfall Interactive indicated that it used a limited number of pre-existing assets, notably 3D assets sourced from the Unreal Engine marketplace. None of these assets were created using artificial intelligence. Sandfall Interactive further clarifies is that there are no generative AI created assets in the game. When the first AI tools became available in 2022, some members of the team briefly experimented with them to generate temporary placeholder textures. Upon release, instances of a placeholder texture were removed within 5 days to be replaced with the correct textures that had always been intended for release, but were missed during the quality assurance process. So similarly to Baldur's Gate 3, these were just placeholder textures that the team briefly experimented with, and that's it. The whole game is not made with AI. They make this abundantly clear, and this, from what I understand, is the only instance where it is confirmed that AI was used in the final product, but people latched onto this, completely stretched the truth, and were relentlessly shitting on the entire game because of this incident. Pretty much saying things that are just not true and not provable whatsoever, and people are even going as far to call the entire game AI slop, all because of an oversight they made in which they fixed days later. Which, by the way, for everyone talking about appreciating devs and their work, is incredibly insulting to the people that did things like make the music, voice the characters, write the story, create the art, and everything else that was done by actual people, which was a lot besides them experimenting with AI tools on placeholder assets in a time frame of like 3 years ago. However, once again, Expedition 33 still got a lot of flack because of that, and the aftermath of this caused the Indie Game Awards, that originally had Expedition 33 as their game of the year, making the executive decision to disqualify the game and instead gave it to Blueprints instead, which, in my opinion, they have the right to do so if they so want, and if that's their rule set for what applies, then fair enough, fine. And to be fair to the Indie Game Awards, apparently one of the reps at Sandfall said that there was no Gen AI used at all. I kind of don't understand how you couldn't figure out that they had generative AI, and I don't understand why they would lie about that, but it is what it is. So first of all, I just want to make it clear, this is the final time I'm going to talk about like AI stuff for a bit, because I'm kind of sick of this topic, and I think it's just gotten so toxic. I just don't care to talk about this topic anymore. And I feel like the more you get into topics about like AI and stuff, the more that I agree with PewDiePie when he covered AI in his channel one time.
I do not F with image generation or video generation. I genuinely think AI art looks ass. It looks bad. You can tell immediately it's AI generated. And the art that does look cool has been straight up ripped off from another artist. So why not just look up the artist? Even here on YouTube, the AI features are so useless. It's just become the hot next buzzword, and it's very annoying. But on the other hand, the people that just hate AI are equally centrist take coming. They're all bad. And from trying to self-host AI, I realized just how much misinformation there is about AI, especially because I didn't know anything about it.
I am not pro-AI, and I still hate the pro-AI losers that dick ride AI till the cows come home. And I want to be very clear here that I also hate that companies are using AI to do a lot of scummy practices that I definitely do not condone whatsoever. However, I do have to highlight that I find the people that cry at the mere mention of it just as annoying. And this is one thing that I hate about the internet, and where I think discourse doesn't mean anything. There's no point in throwing your hat into the ring, because everything by people are seen in black and white. And people can't have a conversation about something without it being in either one extreme or the other extreme. There's no nuance when talking about AI. You either have to be the most proest of pro AI, or you have to denounce any form of AI or generative AI being used at all without fail. There is no exceptions whatsoever. And if you do think so, you love AI and you want to have consensual intercourse with it. And obviously I understand this is not real life. However, this is the internet and the internet sucks. I obviously think black and white thinking should exist for multiple topics, but this type of closed-minded thinking is what kills nuance in most situations where there should very well be nuance, especially with AI. And as we're learning stuff about AI and figuring out ways how to integrate it without it being detrimental to people's employment. And so I full well believe that this black and white thinking is not productive to the topic of AI whatsoever. I'm sorry guys, but at the end of the day, we have to live with AI. It's come out the genie bottle. We cannot reverse time and have a world where AI is not used, and we have to adapt to it. It's scary and I understand, but that's what we have to do, or else it is ultimately just going to take over being completely unregulated. We have to explore different possibilities. And I'm sorry, but AI can be useful. Yes, even generative AI can be useful. I'll give you an example. In certain editing programs, there's a music editor that can have the AI tool adjust how long you want the track to be, whether you want it to be shorter and longer. And as someone that edits a lot with music, that is a super useful tool and cuts down time I would have to spend finding points in a song to splice in and whatnot. I'm not saying it needs to replace people. I 1000% disagree with that rhetoric, but it has the ability to be a tool that productively speeds up workflow without harming jobs. Both can coexist. And I think Larian and Sandfall are experimenting and using it in ways that's productive. At least that's from what I understand. There's no massive layoffs going on at either company, and we don't even know if they're using it now how they used it before, because both companies said that they experimented using it. I think it's okay for a concept artist to use generative AI to find specific references that you can't find on Google, or that would be easier to generate, so that way they can get to work on being creative. And before people say, oh, but it steals from artists anyway, so it doesn't even matter. Well, because in both instances, they weren't meant to be in the final product and only used in the process of finding specific references that a concept artist might need to make the concept art in the first place, then by your own logic, finding pictures on Google are also bad, because that is also stealing artists' work to make your concept art. So then that wouldn't be allowed in your world as well. You see how this just isn't productive in the slightest? And this lack of nuance makes this conversation completely cancer. And if you still think that using this type of AI in every single way, shape, and form is bad and should not be used, then guys, I cannot wait for you guys to pull up your pitchforks and boycott Kojima's next project and CD Projekt Red as well, since using AI in any of these cases is bad, right? It doesn't matter that Kojima isn't using it, specifically generative AI, he's still endorsing it. Well, can't wait to you guys. And I just want to finish off like this. I'm not saying that nobody cares about the concept of AI being used, but I definitely think in this case, a lot of people do not care. What I think happened is that people were very angry about Expedition 33 winning so many awards, and because of that, people wanted to latch on to any hate possible they could find to completely discredit the game. They were already doing this before. This is just more ammo that they use to justify their hate for the company and the game. And people have quite literally admitted to this too, that this is more of a hate agenda rather than actually caring about AI. So this isn't even like a theory, this is just what people are doing. And just to be clear, I still think that a lot of the conversation we've had about Expedition 33 in this video still apply to me. Like, I still think a few of the nominations like Best Art Direction and Best Debut can definitely still be argued against about it if it even deserves to be on those spots and win. But I'm sorry, this whole AI thing is a massive nothing burger, and this hate boner that you have can be redirected into other harmful instances of AI being used, in which there are plenty, even in the game industry. Either way, the lesson is that everyone sucks. I hate you all. That's the lesson. Overall, the Game Awards was very interesting this year. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of rant about the Game Awards for a little bit. There's probably stuff that I'm missing. I would say like is a little bit overhated in my opinion. However, I do think there were some very, very obvious low points from what I could gather and from what I've seen and and whatnot from the internet. I think some people are like complaining about stuff just to like complain. For example, there was like this joke towards Silksong, and people were thinking that he was like slighting Silksong.
And the Game Award goes to Hollow Knight Silksong. See, you guys won. All right, here are the nominees for Best Art Direction.
It obviously was a reference to them saying that Hollow Knight Silksong isn't going to get any awards and they know Expedition 33 is going to take everything. Which, to be fair, they were right. It's just playful banter. It's not that deep, guys. Come on. Either way, though, let me know what you guys think of the Game Awards, and I will catch y'all later. Goodbye. I'm out.